4:22 inches the morning. That's the exact time the clock on my nightstand read when I shot upright in bed, heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to break free. My hands were shaking. Not the mild tremor I sometimes get in cold weather, but a full, uncontrollable shake that rattled the glass of water on the side table when I reached for it. I sat there in the dark for a long moment, trying to breathe. Before I go any further, drop your city and the time where you are right now in the comments below. I love knowing who's out there listening. There's something about knowing you're not alone at 4 inches the morning that makes everything a little more bearable. My name is Frank. I'm 68 years old. I'm a retired high school history teacher from Granbury, Texas. And 18 months ago, I lost the woman who had been the center of my world for 41 years. Her name was Helen. She was a first-grade teacher, a terrible driver, an extraordinary baker, and the most quietly perceptive person I have ever known in my life. She passed in February after a 14-month battle with pancreatic cancer that she fought with more grace and dignity than I could have ever managed. The last thing she said to me before she closed her eyes for the final time was, "You're going to be okay, Frank. I'll make sure of it." I didn't understand what she meant by that. Not then. I have 2 children. My daughter, who lives in Fort Worth with her husband and my 2 grandchildren, has been my anchor since her mother passed. She calls every single morning. Not texts, calls. She shows up on weekends with casseroles I don't ask for and stays long enough to make sure I've eaten something that isn't crackers and coffee. She is, in every way that matters, her mother's daughter. My son is a different story. He's 39, lives in Dallas, works in commercial real estate development. He's always been the ambitious one. Helen used to say he had her father's eyes and her grandfather's hunger, and she didn't mean that entirely as a compliment. She loved him fiercely, the way mothers do, but she saw him clearly. She never pretended otherwise. 3 weeks before that 4:22 morning, my son had come down to Granbury for the first time in almost 8 months. He showed up looking sharp in the kind of clothes that cost more than my first car, carrying a bottle of wine and a folder of paperwork. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where Helen and I had eaten 41 years of meals, and he explained, very calmly and very reasonably, that he wanted to help me with my estate planning. "Dad," he said, pouring wine I hadn't asked for into a glass in front of me, "you've got assets that aren't protected. The lake house, Mom's investment accounts, the property on Lipan Highway. If something happened to you tomorrow, it would all go into probate and get tied up for years. I've talked to my attorney. There's a simple way to structure everything so it's clean, efficient, and protected. You just need to sign a few documents." He slid the folder across the table toward me. I remember looking down at it. I remember noticing it was thicker than I would have expected for something described as simple. I remember my hand resting on top of it without opening it and something in my chest pulling tight in a way I couldn't name. "I'll look it over," I told him. He nodded, smiled, refilled his wine. "I've scheduled a meeting with my attorney for Thursday the 17th, just to make things official. It really is the best thing for the family, Dad." He said the family like that settled it. Like that phrase was a door that couldn't be argued through. He stayed for dinner. He was charming and funny, and he talked about my grandchildren the way people talk about things they want you to associate them with. I walked him to his truck at 9 o'clock, and he hugged me and said, "Thursday, Dad. I'll pick you up at 10. After he drove away, I stood at the end of my driveway for a long time in the dark. The folder was on the kitchen table. I went back inside and I sat down in my armchair. Helen's was the one beside it, empty as it always is now, and I tried to read through those papers. I'm not a stupid man. I spent 32 years teaching teenagers to think critically, but legal documents written by a real estate attorney have a way of making intelligent people feel like they're reading a foreign language. There were transfer clauses and beneficiary designations and revocable trust language and pages of definitions. I got about 12 pages in, and then I set the folder on the coffee table and I told myself I'd finish it in the morning when my eyes weren't tired. I never did finish it. I kept meaning to. I'd walk past the coffee table and think, I should read the rest of those papers. Then I'd make coffee. Then I'd sit in the backyard. Then I'd call my daughter, who I didn't tell about the meeting because something I couldn't articulate yet made me hold it back. The folder sat there for 3 weeks, the first 12 pages dog-eared where I'd stopped, and Thursday the 17th was bearing down on me like a deadline I hadn't studied for. The night of Wednesday the 16th, I went to bed at my usual time. I wasn't anxious, or at least I didn't recognize it as anxiety. I was tired in the bone-deep way that grief leaves you even 18 months out, and I was asleep within minutes. I don't remember the early part of the dream. I only remember that at some point I was standing in our old kitchen. Not the one I'm in now, the one we lived in for 20 years in Weatherford before we moved to Granbury. Yellow walls. Linoleum floor with the small brown burn mark near the refrigerator from the time my son decided to experiment with matches at age 9. Helen's recipe box sitting on the counter where it always sat, the one with the blue enamel lid and the small white flowers painted along the edges, the one her mother gave her when she got married. Helen was standing at the sink. She was wearing the green cardigan she wore on weekends. Her hair was the dark brown it was before it went gray, the way it looked when we were in our 40s. She didn't look sick. She looked exactly like herself on a Saturday morning, unhurried and present and completely at ease. She turned around and looked at me, and her expression was not alarmed or distressed. It was the particular look she had when she was telling me something she'd already decided I needed to hear. Patient but firm. The look she gave me when she said things like, "Frank, I need you to actually listen to this part. The recipe box," she said. "My recipe box, Frank. Get it out of the closet, in my sewing room. Look underneath the second tray. Do it before you go anywhere tomorrow." I said something in the dream, I don't know what. I think I asked her why. Or maybe I just said her name. She put her hand on my arm. I could feel the warmth of it. "You trust too much," she said. "You always have. It's one of the things I love most about you, and one of the things that worries me most. Don't sign anything tomorrow until you look in that box." Then I was awake. 4:22. Hands shaking. I sat in the dark for a while the way you do after a dream like that, half trying to hold on to it, half trying to decide how much weight to give it. I'm not a man who puts stock in the supernatural. I'm a man who taught students to examine evidence. But I am also a man who spent 41 years married to a woman whose instincts were almost never wrong. And standing in that dream kitchen with her hand on my arm had felt realer than anything I'd touched in 18 months. I got up at 5:30. I made coffee. I stood at the kitchen counter and drank half a cup before I walked down the hallway to Helen's sewing room. I want to describe this room to you because I think it matters. I haven't changed anything in it. Her sewing machine is still set up on the table by the window. Her fabric bins are still stacked in the corner. It smells, faintly and improbably, like the lavender soap she used and the cedar in the closet where she kept her craft supplies. I don't go in there often. It feels like a place I'm not supposed to disturb. The closet has 3 shelves. The bottom shelf is where she kept her extra fabric. The middle shelf has boxes of thread, buttons, her pincushion collection. The top shelf has bins I haven't opened since before she died. And there, pushed to the back of the top shelf, behind a bin of Christmas ribbon and a shoebox of old photographs, was the recipe box with the blue enamel lid and the small white flowers painted along the edges. I stood on a step stool to reach it. I carried it to the kitchen table. My coffee was still warm. I took off the lid. The top tray held index cards, her handwriting on every one of them. Her mother's pound cake, her grandmother's brisket, the lemon icebox pie she made for every holiday, the chicken and dumplings that my son had requested for every single birthday from ages 6 through 18. I stood there looking at those cards for a long moment, running my thumb along the edges of them, and I allowed myself 30 seconds to just miss her. Then I lifted out the tray. Underneath, in the bottom of the box, there was no second tray. There was a brown envelope, sealed, with my name written on it in Helen's handwriting. Below that, a folded document. Below that, a small spiral notebook I didn't recognize. I sat down. My hands were steadier than I expected them to be. The envelope first. I opened it carefully. The way you open something you understand is going to matter. Inside was a letter, 3 pages, handwritten, dated 8 months before she died. "Frank, if you're reading this, it means I was right to leave it here. I'm sorry for the drama of it. You know, I prefer to just say things plainly. But I needed to write this down somewhere. I was certain you'd find it when you needed it, and not before. You would have worried, and there was nothing to be done yet. There may still be nothing to be done, but I want you to know what I found." I read that letter 4 times. I'm not going to tell you everything that was in it because some of it is private in ways that belong only to my family. But I will tell you what she had found. Helen had always managed our finances. Not because I couldn't, but because she was better at it, and she enjoyed it, and I trusted her completely. About 2 years before she died, she noticed irregularities in one of our joint investment accounts, an account that she and I had opened together in 1998 and had been quietly growing ever since. Money was moving in small increments, never more than $2,000 or $3,000 at a time, always through transfers that had authorized signatures on them. Her signature, except she hadn't signed them. She had investigated carefully and quietly, the way she did everything. She had called the brokerage and requested copies of the original authorization forms. She had compared the signatures to her own. She had contacted a notary she trusted and confirmed what she already believed. Someone had been forging her signature, had been doing it as near as she could determine, for almost 3 years, enough to move nearly $60,000 out of that account. She had her suspicions. She wrote them in the letter with the same careful, fair-minded precision she brought to everything. She said she had no absolute proof of who had done it, but she had a set of reasons that pointed in one direction, and she listed them. She said she had consulted with a different attorney, not a family friend, not anyone connected to my son, and that attorney had advised her to gather more evidence before making any accusations. She said she had placed copies of the relevant documents in the notebook. She said she was telling me this way, in a letter, hidden in a recipe box, because she knew her cancer was not going to give her enough time to finish what she'd started, and she needed me to know without it becoming a deathbed accusation. She didn't want her last months with our family to be consumed by something she couldn't prove yet. She wanted, as she put it, to leave with the love intact, even if the trust is damaged. She said near the end of the letter, "I don't know what you'll find in the account statements if you look closely. I don't know what he might try after I'm gone. But I know you, Frank. You extend your hand before you check who's reaching for it. I love you for it, and I need you to be careful." I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. The notebook. I opened it. Her handwriting again, precise and organized. Account numbers, transaction dates, amounts. Copies of those authorization forms she'd mentioned, folded small. And at the back of the notebook, tucked into the spiral binding, a copy of the deed for the lake house. I want to tell you about the lake house, because you need to understand what it meant to us. We bought it in 2001, a small cedar cabin on Possum Kingdom Lake, about 40 minutes from Granbury. It was not a grand property. It needed work when we bought it, and it still has a screen door that sticks in the humidity. But Helen and I spent more of our best years in that lake house than almost anywhere else. That's where our daughter learned to fish. That's where my son had his first serious conversation with me about what he wanted to do with his life, sitting on the dock at sundown with our feet in the water. That's where Helen and I went every anniversary without fail, even when we were tired, even when life was hard, because being there reminded us of who we were to each other. 3 years ago, Helen had changed the deed. I hadn't known this. She hadn't mentioned it. Looking at the copy in the notebook, I could see that she had restructured it so that the lake house was held in a family trust with both children listed as equal beneficiaries. Not just my son, both of them, equally. The papers in the folder on my coffee table, the ones my son wanted me to sign at 10 o'clock on Thursday morning, included a transfer of the lake house into a separate LLC that he controlled. I sat with that understanding for a while. Then I called my daughter. She answered on the second ring, the way she always does. I told her I needed her to come. I told her it wasn't an emergency. Nobody was hurt. But I needed her here before 10 o'clock. I could hear her reading my voice the way she always does, the same way her mother did. "I'm leaving in 20 minutes, she said. She sat across from me at the kitchen table with Helen's letter in her hands and the notebook open in front of her, and I watched her read everything slowly and carefully the way her mother would have read it, her expression moving through things she didn't let become words yet. When she finished, she set the letter down and she was quiet for a moment. Then she looked up at me and said, "Dad, I knew something was wrong. I didn't know what it was, but I knew." I asked her what she meant. She told me that in the weeks after Helen died, my son had called her twice to ask whether she'd been named in the lake house deed. She had thought it was just grief, just the kind of practical questions people ask when they're not sure how to feel their feelings and they reach for logistics instead. She hadn't pressed it. She told me she wished she had. I called my son at 9 o'clock and told him I'd be ready at 10, that he should still come. He pulled into my driveway at 9:58, which he had always done when something mattered to him, arrived just before the time, never late, always signaling that he was reliable, that he had prepared. I watched him from the living room window. He was wearing a collared shirt and the good watch he saved for occasions he considered important. He was carrying a leather portfolio. My daughter's car was parked on the street. He didn't notice it, or didn't register it, until she opened the front door before he reached the porch. I watched his face in that moment. I've had 68 years of practice reading faces. There are things you cannot hide in the first half-second of surprise. He recovered quickly. He smiled. He said her name and asked what brought her out. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one. Helen's letter was not visible. The notebook was not visible. I had decided how I wanted to do this. I let him go through the folder with me for a while. I asked questions. I watched him answer them, smooth and reasonable, explaining each document in the patient, slightly simplified way he used with me when he'd decided I was out of my depth. And I let him. I let him explain the LLC structure and the liability protection and the tax efficiency and the way this was simply the responsible thing to do with assets of this kind. Then I asked him about the investment account. I want to be clear about something. I did not raise my voice. I have never been a man who raises his voice, and I was not going to start that morning. I asked him, quietly and directly, why there had been transfer authorizations on that account with his mother's signature on them that his mother told me, in a letter she left for me to find, that she had not signed. The room got very quiet. He looked at the table, then at me, then at his sister, then back at the table. I watched him work through the calculations that people do in moments like this, the mental arithmetic of what's been seen, what can be denied, what the cost of each option is. I have watched students do it when I caught them in something they believed I couldn't prove. There's a particular stillness that comes before a person decides to stop pretending. He put his hands flat on the table. I needed to cover some losses, he said. In 2019 and 2020, the market was a deal that went bad and I needed to keep things liquid. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was going to put it back. My daughter started to say something, and I put my hand on her arm. Did you? I asked him. He shook his head. And the lake house, I said. The LLC. He was quiet for a long moment. Mom changed the deed without telling me. I knew what the property was worth, and I thought if I could hold it under the LLC, I could. He stopped. I don't have a good explanation for this, Dad. I believe that was the truest thing he said in that conversation. I told him about the dream. I told him about walking into Helen's sewing room at 5:30 in the morning and climbing on a step stool to reach the top shelf of her closet. I told him about the letter, about the notebook, about everything his mother had discovered and carried quietly through the last year of her life because she didn't want her dying days to be spent watching the people she loved accuse each other. I watched his face while I said it, and what I saw there was not just guilt. It was grief, the real kind. I think it may have been the first time since his mother died that he truly understood how well she had known him. He put his hands over his eyes. He sat like that for a while. When he looked up, they were red. He said her name. He said he was sorry. He said it to me, and then he said it to his sister. And then he looked at the empty chair where Helen would have been sitting, and he said it again. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment because I think honesty is the only thing that makes any of this worth telling. I felt grief. I felt it freshly and sharply, the way you do when something makes the loss specific again. I felt angry, not the explosive kind, but the deep, quiet kind that sits in your chest and doesn't shout. I felt sorry for my son in a way that coexisted with everything else. That surprised me a little. He is not a villain in my mind. He is a man who made choices that a greedy and frightened part of him rationalized until the rationalizations became their own kind of reality. I have taught enough history to know that this is one of the most common human stories there is. That doesn't make it right. It doesn't undo the damage. But it means I can look at my son and see both the harm he did and the person he still is, and that I don't have to choose between them. I told him I forgave him. I meant it. I told him I would not be signing the papers in the folder, that the folder could go back with him when he left. I told him that the account irregularities would need to be addressed with an attorney, not his attorney, not mine, but someone neutral, and that there would be a process for restitution. I told him that the lake house would remain in the trust his mother had created, with both children as equal beneficiaries, exactly as she had intended. He nodded to all of it. He didn't argue. My daughter walked him to his truck. I stayed at the table. I looked at Helen's recipe box sitting there with the blue enamel lid and the small white flowers along the edges, open now, empty of its secrets. I thought about what she said in the letter. You trust too much. It's one of the things I love most about you. I thought about 41 years of evenings at this table, about the lake house screen door that sticks, about teaching my son to drive in the parking lot of the Walmart off Highway 377 on a hot Saturday morning. Both of us laughing at how bad he was at it, Helen watching from the passenger seat with her hand over her mouth. About the night she was diagnosed and we sat in the car outside the hospital for 45 minutes before we could figure out how to go inside and tell our children. About how her hand had felt on my arm in the dream. You're going to be okay, Frank. I'll make sure of it. That's the part that stays with me. I am a man who spent 32 years asking students to look at evidence and follow it to what it actually says, not what they hoped it would say. I'm not asking you to decide what you believe about where that dream came from or what it means that I felt her hand on my arm as clearly as I have ever felt anything. I'm just telling you what happened, in the order it happened, and letting you sit with it the way I have. What I know is this. She left a letter. She left a notebook. She hid them in a box on a shelf in a room she knew I would walk into eventually. Because she knew me, she knew I would find my way back there. She spent the last year of her life protecting something after she was gone. And somehow, in the way that 41 years of marriage perhaps earns, something got me out of bed at 4:22 inches the morning, and sent me to find it before I walked out the door, and signed away what she had worked to preserve. You can call that what you want. I call it Helen. My daughter and I had lunch on the back porch that afternoon. She brought sandwiches she had picked up on the way in, Kana, and we sat in the October sun, and we talked about her mother for a long time, not about the illness, not about the loss, but about who she was, the way she laughed, the way she always knew when something was wrong before you said a word, the way she made every person at her table feel like the most important person in the room. I pulled up some of the recipe cards later that evening. I made the lemon icebox pie. It took me almost twice as long as it should have because I kept stopping to reread the instructions in her handwriting, adjusting and checking the way she had always done. It wasn't as good as when she made it. I don't think it ever will be. But I made it, and I sat at the kitchen table, and I ate a piece of it in the quiet house as the sun went down. And I was grateful genuinely, specifically, in the way that grief sometimes opens you up to gratitude you wouldn't otherwise be capable of just to be a man with a recipe box and a 41-year history and a daughter who calls every morning in a lake house, with a screen door that sticks. If this story reached something in you, if it reminded you of someone, or made you pick up the phone, or made you think about what the people you trust are actually doing with that trust, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what time it is there. Tell me if you've ever had a dream like that. The kind that doesn't feel like a dream. Hold the people who are still here. Listen to the ones who aren't. And never be too busy, too certain, or too trusting to look in the box on the shelf before you sign anything at all.